You don't usually notice overtrading while it's happening. It doesn't feel reckless. It feels busy, engaged, responsible even. You tell yourself you're staying on top of the market, you're reacting, you're doing the work. The problem is that professional markets don't reward activity. They punish it quietly. And by the time the damage shows up in your equity curve, the behavior that caused it already feels normal. Most traders don't blow up from one bad decision. They bleed out from a pattern they never named. There's a moment before every major drawdown where the trader still feels in control. That moment matters more than the loss itself, because that's where the signal is. This is that signal. This is timeless market lessons, where market wisdom outlives markets. What follows isn't theory. It's not advice framed as motivation. It's a set of behavioral markers pulled from a trading journal that was never meant to become a lesson. They were written down because something felt off, repeatedly. Here's the uncomfortable part. Every marker made sense at the time. That's the trap. Professional markets create an environment where overtrading looks like competence. Screens are always moving, news is constant, liquidity is deep. There's always a reason to act. And if you're not careful, you start confusing participation with edge. Most people don't notice this until it's too late. One of the first signs showed up as restlessness, not boredom, restlessness with positions that were already on. Trades that matched the plan suddenly felt slow, incomplete. So small adjustments started creeping in, a partial exit that wasn't planned, a re-entry that wasn't required. Nothing dramatic, just friction added to what used to be simple. Here's where traders usually get it wrong. They interpret that restlessness as intuition sharpening. They think they're getting better at reading flow. They're not. They're losing patience. Another marker was position overlap. Not doubling down, just stacking exposure across instruments that felt different but weren't. Same risk, same factor, same outcome. On paper, it looked diversified. In reality, it was concentration disguised as sophistication. At the time, it felt logical. It wasn't. A third sign appeared in language. The journal entries got longer, more explanation, more justification. When a trade works, you note it and move on. When it doesn't, you start writing essays. That's not analysis, that's defense. There was also a subtle shift in timing. Trades started happening earlier, not impulsive, but anticipatory. You tell yourself you're getting ahead of the move. What's actually happening is discomfort with waiting. Silence feels like risk. Action feels like control. Pause. This is the moment most professionals miss, because nothing is obviously wrong yet. Around this point, Ed Seykota figured out something most traders only learn after years of churn. He noticed that the biggest losses didn't come from bad systems, they came from breaking rhythm, from trading more, not better, not because the market changed, but because the trader did. Another marker showed up as screen fixation, more time watching, less time preparing. The morning routine shrank, the trading day expanded. That imbalance matters. When preparation time drops and execution time rises, you're no longer operating from structure, you're reacting. Professional markets are unforgiving to reactive behavior. They don't care how experienced you are, they only respond to consistency. There was also a false sense of productivity. More trades meant more data, more feedback, more learning. Except the learning curve flattened. Mistakes repeated, and the same explanations kept appearing under different trades. The pattern repeats, always. Here's a statistic worth sitting with. In the journal, over 70% of the largest drawdowns were preceded by an increase in trade frequency. Not volatility, not regime shifts, just more decisions per unit of time. Think about that. Not worse decisions, more decisions. That's the distinction most people miss. Another sign was emotional neutrality, not calm, flat. Losses didn't sting, wins didn't register. That sounds like professionalism. It isn't. It's dissociation. When outcomes stop mattering, discipline erodes quietly. You stop protecting capital because nothing feels urgent. And that's when size creeps, not dramatically, incrementally. One last marker showed up right before every major drawdown, a feeling of being in sync with the market. That's the most dangerous one, because it creates confidence without constraint, and constraint is what keeps professionals alive. If this resonates, subscribe. We explore these patterns weekly. None of these signs looked like mistakes while they were happening. They looked like evolution, like growth, like becoming more active, more engaged, more professional. That's the identity threat. The realization that what feels like progress can actually be regression. Overtrading in professional markets isn't about lack of knowledge, it's about excess familiarity. You know enough to act, not enough to stop. The journal didn't fix the problem immediately, it just made the pattern visible. And visibility is the first uncomfortable step. Because once you can see it, you can't unsee it. And the question shifts from, what is the market doing, to something far quieter. What am I doing differently right now? The uncomfortable part about seeing the pattern is that it doesn't stop you from repeating it. Awareness doesn't create discipline, it just removes excuses. Once those signs were identified, a different problem appeared: the inner conflict. On one side, there was the rule set, clear entries, defined exits, risk limits that had worked over time. On the other, there was a constant internal pressure to stay engaged, to justify screen time, to prove attentiveness in markets that never sleep. This is where most traders quietly lose control. Not in panic, but in negotiation. They start negotiating with their own framework. A trade almost fits. A setup is close enough. The risk is slightly higher, but the conviction feels stronger. Each exception feels small, reasonable, temporary. The danger isn't the exception itself, it's the habit of granting them. Fear plays an odd role here. It's not fear of losing money, it's fear of missing relevance. If you're not trading, are you falling behind? If you're not active, are you losing touch? Professional markets create that anxiety by design. There's always someone else trading more, posting more, claiming more insight. So you compensate, you increase exposure, you shorten your holding period, you trade signals you used to ignore. Quietly, risk psychology shifts. Losses stop being evaluated individually, they get absorbed into the day. Wins don't restore confidence, they justify continuation. This is how self-sabotage forms without awareness. There was a moment in the journal where this became obvious. After a losing streak, the notes didn't show fear, they showed irritation. Not at the market, at inactivity. That's revealing. When inactivity feels threatening, you've already lost alignment. Because your edge was never about constant presence, it was about selective participation. Here's a perspective shift worth pausing on. Overtrading isn't driven by greed. It's driven by discomfort with stillness. Silence between trades feels like vulnerability. Action feels protective. But action without edge isn't protection, it's exposure. This conflict intensifies because experience masks it. Beginners hesitate because they don't know what to do. Experienced traders hesitate because they know too much. They can justify almost anything. Every market condition has a precedent. Every loss has an explanation. Every trade can be rationalized after the fact. That's where structure matters most, not as a system, but as a boundary. Another pattern emerged during this phase. The metrics being watched changed. Instead of drawdown and expectancy, attention shifted to accuracy, win rate, frequency. Those are seductive numbers. They move often. They create feedback, but they don't measure what keeps you solvent. Here's where traders usually get it wrong. They assume refinement means complexity, more filters, more conditions, more trades to stay sharp. What actually happens is the opposite. Signal quality drops, decision fatigue rises, and small losses accumulate unnoticed. Pause. This is where Ed Sekoda's thinking becomes relevant again. He wasn't focused on being right. He was focused on staying aligned with his own behavior. He understood that systems fail less often than traders abandon them, not in moments of fear, but in moments of overconfidence disguised as engagement. The realization didn't arrive as an insight, it arrived as exhaustion. After another drawdown, the journal entry was short. No explanation, no justification, just one line. Too many decisions. That line mattered because it reframed the problem. The issue wasn't market conditions. It wasn't volatility. It wasn't edge decay. It was decision volume. Every trade carries cognitive weight. Every decision consumes discipline. Professionals don't run out of capital first. They run out of restraint. Once that clicked, the framework shifted. Instead of asking, is this trade valid? The better question became, does this trade add value to the day? Most don't. That realization strips away a lot of noise. You stop hunting for opportunity. You start filtering for necessity. This isn't about trading less for comfort. It's about trading less to protect clarity. A calm mind sees risk earlier. A crowded mind rationalizes it. The core insight was simple but uncomfortable. The edge wasn't in entries, it was in reduction. Reducing frequency, reducing overlap, reducing decision points. Not as punishment, as preservation. This is where the cycle began to break, not through willpower, but through rules that limited exposure before behavior deteriorated. There was a specific threshold identified. When trade count exceeded it, results degraded every time. That wasn't coincidence. That was capacity. If this resonates, the channel is built for listeners like you. Consider subscribing. The market didn't need to be conquered. It needed to be approached with restraint. That realization doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels like loss of activity, of identity. But it creates something far more durable. Space. Once the realization settled, the changes didn't arrive dramatically. There was no reset, no declaration of a new era, just subtraction. The first adjustment wasn't about entries, it was about mornings. The routine became shorter but firmer. Markets reviewed once, key levels marked, risk defined before the session began. After that, nothing new was added. No scanning mid-session, no reacting to movement that wasn't already anticipated. This mattered more than it sounds. When preparation is complete early, execution becomes quieter. You're no longer searching, you're waiting. Waiting changes behavior. The next shift was mechanical, a hard cap on decisions, not trades, decisions. Once that number was reached, trading stopped for the day. Not because opportunities disappeared, but because judgment deteriorated past that point. This wasn't discipline in the motivational sense. It was acceptance of limitation. Professionals don't pretend to have infinite focus. They design around its absence. The exposure reduction rule came next. It was simple and uncomfortable. When the account experienced a predefined drawdown, size was cut automatically. No discretion, no exceptions. Not to protect money, to protect behavior. Because the journal showed something consistent. After drawdowns, the urge to trade increased, not decreased. Reducing exposure during that phase broke the cycle. Fewer trades, less noise, more time to reset alignment. Here's the contrast that matters. Amateurs respond to drawdowns by trying harder. Professionals respond by doing less. Not because they don't care, because they understand causality. Another change appeared in execution flow. Trades were clustered. Either the market offered clean setups or it didn't. There was no attempt to force continuity. Some days ended early, others never started. That felt wrong at first, like wasted opportunity, but results stabilized. What became quieter was internal commentary, less narration, less justification. A trade either fit the framework or it didn't. There was no debate. Ignoring this lesson had consequences before. They were predictable. Overlapping risk, mental fatigue, small losses compounding invisibly. The journal had documented that story already. There was no need to relearn it. Pause. This is the part most people skip. They want the rule without the restraint, the clarity without the silence. But silence is the point. As this approach settled in, learning changed shape. Less consumption, more review. Old trades were revisited, not to optimize, to notice behavior. What led to deviation? What preceded impatience? What conditions made rules feel optional? That kind of learning is slow and durable. It doesn't produce immediate improvement. It produces stability. Over time, the lifestyle adjusted too. Shorter trading days, clearer separation between markets and life. Stress didn't disappear, it became contained. Sleep improved, attention widened, markets stopped leaking into everything else. That balance wasn't a goal, it was a byproduct of fewer decisions. There's a line attributed to Ed Sakota that fits here, even if you don't think about him often. He framed trading as a mirror, not of intelligence, but of discipline. In that framework, patience isn't passive, it's active restraint. The resolution doesn't arrive cleanly. There's no finish line where overtrading is solved forever. The urge still appears on volatile days, on quiet days, after losses, after wins. The difference is recognition. You notice the signs earlier now. Restlessness, justification, the pull toward activity. And when they show up, you don't argue with them. You reduce exposure. You step back. That's the real rule. Not when to trade, when to stop. There's no satisfaction in that answer, no drama, just consistency. And in professional markets, consistency is the only thing that compounds. Quietly.